The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Ridge Drive as Sarah Chen hurried to unload groceries from her car. The quiet suburban neighborhood had been her family's home for 3 years, and she loved everything about it: the tree-lined streets, the friendly neighbors, and the sense of safety it provided for her 2 young children. As she balanced bags in both arms, Sarah noticed a white van parked across the street that she didn't recognize. 2 men in dark uniforms sat inside, watching her house with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She quickened her pace toward the front door, keys jingling in her hand. The van's doors opened with a metallic clang and both men stepped out. They wore official-looking security uniforms with badges that glinted in the sunlight, and their stern expressions suggested serious business. The taller man, with graying hair and a thick mustache, approached first while his partner, younger and stockier, followed close behind. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about a violation," the older man called out, his voice carrying an authoritative tone that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She fumbled with her keys, accidentally dropping a bag of apples that rolled across the driveway. "What kind of violation?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she gathered the scattered fruit. She had always been careful to follow all neighborhood rules, keeping her lawn manicured and her house painted in approved colors. The younger man stepped forward, pulling out a clipboard with official-looking papers. "HOA security enforcement. We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized modifications to your property. You're going to need to come with us for questioning." Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't made any modifications to her house recently, and she knew the HOA guidelines by heart. Something felt wrong about this entire situation, but the men's uniforms and official demeanor made her question her instincts. "I don't understand. What modifications are you talking about?" she asked, backing toward her front door. The groceries felt heavier in her arms, and she wished her husband Mike wasn't away on his business trip to Seattle. The older man's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we're not here to debate. You can come willingly, or we can make this more difficult. Your choice." His hand moved to something on his belt, and Sarah's blood ran cold. Just then, the sound of footsteps on pavement caught everyone's attention. Sarah's neighbor from 2 houses down was walking his German Shepherd Rex and heading directly toward them. The dog's ears were perked up, sensing the tension in the air. "Everything all right over here, Sarah?" the neighbor called out. His name was David Rodriguez, and though they had only exchanged pleasantries over the fence before, Sarah had never been more grateful to see a familiar face. The 2 men in uniforms exchanged glances, clearly not expecting an interruption. The younger one cleared his throat and addressed David with forced authority. "Sir, this is official HOA business. We need you to move along." David's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. Something in his posture changed, becoming more alert and focused. Rex growled low in his throat, picking up on his owner's shift in energy. "I live in this neighborhood too, and I've never seen you gentlemen before. Mind showing me some proper identification?" The older man's jaw tightened. "We don't answer to residents. This woman is coming with us for questioning about property violations. And that's final." He took a step closer to Sarah, who instinctively pressed herself against her front door. "Actually," David said calmly, his voice carrying a quiet strength that made both men pause, "I think you'll find that's not how this works. Sarah, do you want to go with these men?" "No," Sarah whispered, then found her voice. "No, I don't. I haven't done anything wrong. And I don't even know who they really are." The situation was escalating quickly, and the 2 men seemed to realize their intimidation tactics weren't working as planned. The younger one muttered something under his breath to his partner, and they both turned their attention to David, who stood calmly with his dog, watching their every move with the patience of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. David Rodriguez maintained his calm demeanor as the 2 men in uniforms grew increasingly agitated. 20 years of military service had taught him to read people, and everything about these men screamed deception. Their uniforms looked authentic from a distance, but up close he could see they were cheap imitations. The badges were plastic, not metal, and their positioning was all wrong. "Look, buddy," the older man said, his voice taking on a more threatening tone. "You don't want to get involved in this. Walk away now and nobody gets hurt." Sarah's grip tightened on her groceries as she watched the standoff unfold. David's presence had given her hope, but she could see the situation was becoming more dangerous by the minute. The younger man had moved to position himself between her and David, effectively cutting off her potential escape route. "I'm already involved," David replied evenly. This is my neighborhood and Sarah is my neighbor. Now I'm going to ask one more time. Show me your credentials, or explain exactly what authority you think you have here. Rex sensed the growing tension and positioned himself protectively in front of David, his trained instincts kicking in. The dog's presence seemed to make the fake security officers even more nervous, and they kept glancing at the German Shepherd with obvious concern. The older man reached into his jacket, and David's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Sarah noticed the change immediately. Where David had seemed relaxed before, now every muscle appeared coiled and ready for action. It was like watching a switch flip, transforming the friendly neighbor into something entirely different. "Careful there," David warned, his voice carrying a new edge that made even Sarah take notice. "Whatever you're reaching for, you might want to think twice about it." The man's hand paused halfway to his jacket. Something in David's tone had clearly gotten through to him, and he slowly lowered his arm. The younger man fidgeted with his clipboard, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. "We have every right to investigate violations," the younger man insisted, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "The HOA board authorized this investigation and we're just doing our jobs." David took a step forward and both men instinctively backed up. "Really? Because I serve on the HOA board and we haven't authorized any investigation. In fact, we don't even use security services. We're a small residential community that handles issues through direct communication with homeowners." Sarah's eyes widened. She hadn't known David was on the HOA board, but it explained why he seemed so confident in challenging these men. More importantly, it confirmed her instinct that something was very wrong with this situation. The two fake officers exchanged worried glances. Their entire scheme was falling apart, and they seemed to realize they had picked the wrong neighborhood and definitely the wrong neighbor to witness their intimidation tactics. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding," the older man said, backing toward their van. "We'll sort this out with the main office and come back another time." "I don't think so," David said firmly. "You're not going anywhere until we clear this up. Sarah, can you call the police? I think they'll be very interested in meeting these gentlemen." The mention of police sent both men into a panic. The younger one dropped his clipboard entirely, papers scattering in the breeze while his partner frantically gestured toward their van. It was clear they had no intention of sticking around to explain themselves to law enforcement. "We don't need police involvement," the older man said quickly. "Like I said, it was just a misunderstanding. We'll be going now." But David wasn't about to let them simply walk away after threatening his neighbor. He had seen enough predatory behavior during his military service to recognize it when it appeared in his own backyard. These men weren't just confused security guards, they were dangerous individuals who had targeted Sarah for reasons that went far beyond any property violations. As the two men began moving more urgently toward their van, David made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and began recording, capturing their faces and license plate number before they could escape. The older man noticed and lunged toward David, trying to grab the phone from his hands. That was his first mistake, and it would be his last. The moment the older man lunged for David's phone, muscle memory took over. David's training kicked in with devastating efficiency, and what happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds that felt like slow motion to Sarah, watching from her doorway. David sidestepped the grabbing hands with fluid grace, simultaneously securing his phone while using his free hand to redirect the attacker's momentum. The older man found himself off balance and vulnerable, completely unprepared for the level of skill he had just challenged. "Wrong move," David said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. Rex began barking, adding to the chaos as the younger man frantically tried to decide whether to help his partner or run for the van. The older man attempted to recover, swinging wildly at David, who moved like water around the clumsy attack. Years of combat experience had taught David to read his opponents, and these men were clearly amateurs who relied on intimidation rather than actual skill. With precise movements that spoke of extensive training, David neutralized the threat. The older man found himself face down on the pavement, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that made any resistance extremely painful. The entire encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds. "Sarah, call 911 now," David commanded, never taking his eyes off the younger man who stood frozen beside the van. "Tell them we have two individuals impersonating security officers and attempting to kidnap a resident." The word kidnapping hit Sarah like a physical blow. Until that moment, she hadn't fully grasped how dangerous her situation had been. These men hadn't been trying to issue citations or fines. They had been planning to take her somewhere, and she shuddered to think what might have happened if David hadn't intervened. With shaking hands, she dialed 911 while keeping her eyes on the scene unfolding in her driveway. The younger man seemed torn between helping his partner and fleeing, but David's focused attention on him made it clear that any sudden movements would be met with similar results. "Stay right where you are," David told the younger man conversationally. "Your friend here is learning that not everyone in this neighborhood is as helpless as you thought. You can either wait for the police to arrive, or you can find out what 20 years in the Navy SEALs teaches you about handling threats to innocent people." The revelation hit both men like a thunderbolt. Navy SEAL. Suddenly, everything about David's calm confidence and lethal efficiency made perfect sense. They had stumbled into a situation far beyond their capabilities, targeting a woman whose neighbor happened to be one of the most highly trained warriors on the planet. The younger man's resolve crumbled entirely. "Look, man, we didn't mean any real harm. This is just a job, you know. Someone paid us to scare the lady. Maybe take her for a ride to rough her up a little. We're not killers or anything." "Who paid you?" David asked, applying slightly more pressure to his captive's arm. The older man groaned in pain but remained conscious and alert. "I don't know his real name," the younger man babbled, desperate to cooperate now that he understood what he was dealing with. "Goes by Tony, drives a black Mercedes, always wears expensive suits. He said the woman's husband owed him money, and this was just to send a message." Sarah's blood ran cold. Mike had never mentioned owing money to anyone, but his business trips had become more frequent lately and he had seemed stressed about work. Was there something he hadn't told her? Some debt or business deal that had put their family in danger? The sound of sirens in the distance brought everyone back to the immediate situation. David maintained his hold on the older man while keeping watch on his partner, who showed no signs of trying to escape now that he understood the caliber of person he was dealing with. 20 years, David repeated almost to himself. 20 years of protecting this country from people exactly like you. Did you really think you could come into my neighborhood, threaten my neighbors, and just walk away? The older man finally spoke, his voice strained from his uncomfortable position. "We made a mistake. Wrong house, wrong neighborhood. If you let us go, we'll disappear and never come back." David's laugh was without humor. "Oh, you're definitely not coming back. But you're not leaving either. You're going to have a nice long conversation with the police about who hired you, and then you're going to spend some time thinking about your life choices in a jail cell." As the sirens grew louder, Sarah realized that her quiet suburban life had just been shattered. Someone out there wanted to hurt her family, and the only thing standing between them and danger was a neighbor she barely knew. A neighbor who had just revealed himself to be far more than the friendly dog walker she had assumed him to be. 3 police cars arrived within minutes, their flashing lights painting the quiet suburban street in alternating red and blue. Detective Maria Santos stepped out of the lead vehicle, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the scene. She had been a detective for 15 years and had seen plenty of unusual situations, but a former Navy SEAL detaining fake security officers in a kidnapping attempt was definitely a first. David maintained his hold on the older man until the officers were in position, then smoothly released him and stepped back with his hands visible. His military training extended to dealing with law enforcement. He knew the importance of appearing non-threatening, despite having just neutralized 2 attackers. "I'm David Rodriguez," he told Detective Santos calmly. "Former Navy SEAL, current resident of 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. These 2 men were attempting to abduct my neighbor Sarah Chen under the pretense of being HOA security officers." Detective Santos nodded, noting David's professional demeanor and the way he had secured the scene without causing unnecessary harm. The older attacker was clearly restrained but not seriously injured, and his partner stood nearby looking thoroughly defeated. While other officers secured the suspects and began collecting evidence from the van, Detective Santos interviewed Sarah. The young mother was still shaken but coherent, providing details about the men's approach and their insistence that she come with them for questioning. "They knew things about our house," Sarah explained, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm afternoon. "They mentioned modifications we hadn't made, but they seemed to know the layout, like they'd been watching us." The revelation sent chills down Detective Santos's spine. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. It was a targeted operation that required surveillance and planning. The fact that someone had been watching Sarah's house without her knowledge added another layer of severity to the charges. During questioning, the younger man, who identified himself as Carl Morrison, proved eager to cooperate. The prospect of facing kidnapping charges had completely broken his resolve. And he provided a detailed account of how he and his partner had been hired for what they thought was a simple intimidation job. "This guy Tony contacted us through a mutual acquaintance," Carl explained nervously. "Said he needed someone to scare a woman, maybe rough her up a little to send a message to her husband about a debt. He paid us $5,000 up front with another $5,000 promised when the job was done." His partner, Robert Hayes, remained silent initially, but the weight of potential federal charges eventually loosened his tongue as well. Both men had criminal records for minor assault and fraud, making them ideal candidates for someone looking to hire disposable muscle. The description they provided of their employer was frustratingly vague. Tony was approximately 50 years old, well-dressed, and drove an expensive car, but neither man claimed to know his full name or how to contact him. Their instructions had come through phone calls and cash payments left at predetermined locations. Detective Santos coordinated with the FBI, as the attempted kidnapping potentially crossed state lines and involved organized criminal activity. Agent Jennifer Wu arrived that evening to take over the federal aspects of the investigation, while local police continued gathering evidence. David proved invaluable in providing tactical insights about the operation. His military background allowed him to identify details that others might have missed: the way the van was positioned for quick escape, the fact that both men wore earpieces suggesting coordination with others, and the professional nature of their surveillance equipment found in the vehicle. This wasn't their first job, David told Agent Wu as they reviewed the evidence. They knew how to case a house, when to approach, and how to create false authority. Someone trained them, or they've done this before. Sarah spent the evening at the police station, going through photo arrays and working with a sketch artist to create a composite image of anyone suspicious she might have seen in the neighborhood recently. The process was exhausting, but she was determined to help catch whoever had targeted her family. Meanwhile, David contacted his old Navy SEAL network, quietly putting the word out about the threat to his neighbor. The brotherhood among special operations personnel was strong, and within hours he had volunteers offering to help with security and surveillance while the investigation continued. As the night wore on, one thing became increasingly clear: this was far from over. Tony, whoever he was, had invested significant time and money in targeting Sarah's family. The fact that his hired muscle had been captured wouldn't necessarily deter him. It might just make him more desperate and dangerous. Agent Wu made the decision to place Sarah and her children in protective custody until they could determine the full scope of the threat. It was a precaution that proved wise, because by morning they would discover that Tony had no intention of simply walking away from his investment. The FBI safe house was a nondescript two-story home in a quiet neighborhood 30 miles from Maple Ridge Drive. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, clutching her phone as she waited for Mike to call back from Seattle. She had left 3 voicemails explaining the situation, but his phone seemed to be going straight to voicemail. Agent Wu paced the living room, coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies while David stood watch at the front window. Despite not being officially involved in the investigation, his military expertise had made him an invaluable asset, and Agent Wu had quietly arranged for him to assist with security. "Something's not right about the husband's story," Agent Wu said, ending her latest call. "I spoke with his supposed business associates in Seattle. The company he claimed to be meeting with has no record of any appointments, and the hotel he's supposedly staying at has no reservation under his name." Sarah's heart sank as the implications became clear. Mike wasn't in Seattle on business, he was somewhere else entirely, and he had lied about it. The realization that her husband might be involved in whatever had put her family in danger was almost too much to bear. "There's more," Agent Wu continued gently. "We've been tracking his credit cards and phone records. Mike has been making regular payments to a private investigator in Las Vegas, and there are large cash withdrawals that don't correspond to any legitimate business expenses." David turned from the window, his expression grim. Las Vegas, gambling debts. That's what we're thinking. The PI firm he's been paying specializes in discreet debt collection for high-end casinos and private gambling operations. The kind of people who prefer to handle their own collections rather than go through legal channels. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Her husband, the man she had trusted with their future and their children's safety, had been lying to her for months. Not only had he been gambling, but he had gotten involved with people dangerous enough to send kidnappers after his family. The secure phone rang, and Agent Wu answered immediately. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a satisfied expression. Good news. We found Tony. His real name was Anthony Marconi, and he was indeed connected to private gambling operations in Las Vegas. More importantly, facial recognition software had identified him from security cameras at a gas station just 10 miles away from Sarah's house. He was still in the area, which meant the threat wasn't over. He's not working alone, Agent Wu explained. Marconi has a crew of 6 men, all with military or law enforcement backgrounds. The 2 we caught yesterday were just the advanced team. The real professionals are still out there. David's expression hardened. They'll come for the house first, expecting to find Sarah. When they realize she's not there, they'll start looking for alternate locations. How secure is this safe house? Secure enough for ordinary criminals, Agent Wu admitted. But if they have military training like you're suggesting, we might need to consider relocating again. Before anyone could respond, David's phone buzzed with a text message from his neighbor across the street from Sarah's house. The message was brief but alarming. Strange men watching your friend's house. Should I call police? They're already moving, David said, showing the message to Agent Wu. My neighbor's an insomniac who spends half the night looking out his window. If he says there are strange men watching, we need to assume they're professionals. Agent Wu immediately coordinated with local police to increase patrols around Sarah's neighborhood, while also arranging for additional security at the safe house. But David was already thinking several moves ahead, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. They'll figure out she's not at home within the hour, he said. Then they'll start checking relatives, friends, anywhere she might have gone. The safe house is good, but it's not invisible. If they have the right resources, they'll find us. Sarah looked up from her hands, fear and anger warring in her expression. What about my children? They're at my sister's house in Portland. Are they safe? Agent Wu was already on the phone, coordinating protection for Sarah's sister and children. But the web of danger was expanding rapidly, and each new thread revealed just how deep Mike's problems had become. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone finally rang. Mike's name appeared on the screen, and everyone in the room tensed. This call would either provide answers or confirm their worst fears about his involvement in the situation. Sarah answered with Agent Wu listening on an extension, her voice barely steady as she said, Mike? Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. The voice that responded wasn't Mike's. It was older, rougher, with a slight accent that suggested East Coast origins. Mrs. Chen? Your husband owes my employers a great deal of money. Last night's little incident with our employees was unfortunate, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem. We still need to have a conversation. Anthony Marconi had found them. The voice on Sarah's phone sent chills through everyone in the safe house. Anthony Marconi's tone was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made his words even more menacing. Now, Mrs. Chen, Marconi continued, your husband borrowed $200,000 from my associate 6 months ago. He was supposed to pay it back in 90 days with interest. That deadline has come and gone, and frankly, we're tired of waiting. Agent Wu frantically signaled to her technical team to trace the call, while David moved to secure the perimeter. His trained eyes scanned the street outside, looking for any sign of surveillance or movement that didn't belong. I don't know anything about my husband's debts, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. This is between you and him. Leave me and my children out of it. Marconi's laugh was cold and humorless. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. When someone borrows money from us and then disappears, we look to their family for compensation. It's just good business practice. Where is my husband? Sarah demanded, anger finally overriding her fear. Mr. Chen is currently our guest at a location where he's contemplating his poor financial decisions. He'll remain safe as long as his family cooperates with our collection efforts. Now I'm going to give you an address. You're going to come alone, and we're going to discuss payment arrangements. David caught Agent Wu's attention and shook his head firmly. There was no way they were letting Sarah walk into what was obviously a trap, but Marconi seemed to anticipate their reluctance. "Oh, and Mrs. Chen, if you're thinking about involving more law enforcement, you should know that we're watching your sister's house in Portland. Your children are such beautiful kids, Emily's 7 and Jason's 9, correct? It would be tragic if something happened to them because their mother made poor choices." The threat against her children broke something inside Sarah. She started to agree to Marconi's demands, but David gently took the phone from her hands. "Marconi," David said calmly, "this is David Rodriguez. I'm the neighbor who put your 2 amateurs on the ground yesterday. Here's what's going to happen instead of your little meeting." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Marconi spoke again, his tone had shifted. "The Navy SEAL. My associates mentioned you. Impressive work, by the way. Very professional. 20 years of training will do that. Now you have 2 choices. You can release Mike Chen, disappear and write off this debt as a bad business decision, or you can find out exactly why the Navy spent so much time and money training me to handle people like you." Marconi's response was immediate and sharp. "You're outnumbered 6-1, Rodriguez. Military training is impressive, but it doesn't make you bulletproof." "Maybe not," David agreed, "but it taught me to never make threats I can't back up. How many of your 6 men are willing to die for a gambling debt? Because I guarantee that's what it's going to cost you." The line went quiet for several long moments. Agent Wu held her breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether this situation escalated into open warfare or could be resolved through negotiation. Finally, Marconi spoke again, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "You know what, Rodriguez? In different circumstances, I think we could have been friends, but I've got investors to answer to, and they don't accept military heroics as payment for outstanding debts." "Then let's make this simple," David replied. "I'll give you Mike Chen's exact location and you can collect from him directly. But you leave his family alone and you disappear from this neighborhood permanently." Agent Wu's eyes widened. She had no idea where Mike was, and she was certain David didn't either. But his confident tone suggested he had a plan that might just save everyone's lives. "You have my attention," Marconi said carefully. "Mike Chen is at the Riverside Casino in Reno, Nevada. He's been there for 3 days trying to win back what he owes you. Check the high-stakes poker room. But here's the thing. If I find out you've sent anyone after his family instead of going to collect from him directly, I'll make it my personal mission to introduce you to some of my former teammates." There was another long pause. Finally, Marconi laughed, a genuine sound this time. "You're bluffing about knowing where he is, but I like your style. Tell you what, I'll give you 12 hours. If Chen isn't where you say he is, or if he doesn't have at least half of what he owes, then we go back to the original plan with his family." The line went dead. Agent Wu stared at David in amazement. "Please tell me you actually know where Mike is." David's grin was sharp and confident. "I have no idea where he is, but I know exactly where he's going to be in about 6 hours. Sometimes the best strategy is to turn your enemy's expectations against them." As he explained his plan, Sarah realized that her quiet neighbor wasn't just a former military man. He was a master tactician who had just bought them time and turned a desperate situation into an opportunity. The question now was whether Mike would cooperate with his own rescue, or whether his gambling addiction would doom them all.